Welcome back to graveyarddance.com. This is the true and horrifying story of an unfortunate woman named Fan Man-yi. Although Fan was guilty of stealing a man's wallet, nothing she could have ever done should have warranted the kind of abuse and torture that she endured. Before I even start the case, I want to warn you, this is one of the two most horrible cases that I can think of off the top of my head. It's eerily similar to the Junko Furuta case we did a while back, which you can find on our site at graveyarddance.com. I'm not really sure which page it's on there, but it's not too hard to find. When I hear a case this brutal, it literally breaks my heart, not only for the person who had to endure this unimaginable horror, but also for the people who loved her. I can't begin to imagine their heartbreak or pain. I only hope that Fan has found peace on the other side and has found happiness once again. Before we start, I have to say again, if you're easily offended by graphic content or if you have a really sensitive heart, this may not be the story you want to watch. It's truly disturbing on so many levels. If you're underage, same thing, please turn this video off immediately and do not watch it. This story is for adults only and isn't made for shock value. It's made so that Fan's story can be told and that her memory isn't forgotten. This is usually where we plug our sponsors and website, but instead, let's get straight to the story. Fan Man-yi did not have an easy life. She was abandoned as a child and had to grow up in an orphanage. Unfortunately, she could only stay there until she turned 15 because that was the age limit for kids living in the orphanage. Since she was never adopted and had nowhere to go after leaving, she soon found herself homeless. After becoming homeless, things got worse for Fan. She struggled with addiction to drugs and eventually turned to prostitution, working in a brothel just to survive and feed herself. When Fan was in her early 20s, she got a job as a dancer at the Empress Karaoke nightclub. During this time, she fell in love with one of her clients. Unfortunately, he was also struggling with drug addiction, which only made her own issues worse. Despite their problems, they decided to get married in 1996. However, after they got married, her husband began to treat her poorly. Even though things were tough, Fan chose to stay with him, and they had 2 sons together. Over the next few years, their arguments became more frequent and intense. Neighbors often heard not only the children crying, but also the couple fighting late into the night. By early 1997, Fan had started working as a prostitute again at a brothel called Romance Villa in Kowloon. After spending some time at her job, she met a 34-year-old man named Chon Mon-lok. Chon was known to be a wealthy socialite and was quite popular in the area. She felt an immediate attraction to him because she was a prostitute struggling with drug addiction, and he was a drug dealer who also acted as a pimp. Chon would often pay her for long nights together where they would use crystal meth, also known as ice, which he provided. Before long, she became part of Chan's close group of friends, which included several of his associates or henchmen. Chon Mon-lok was involved with the Triads, a major Chinese organized crime group. He was not someone to take lightly or get involved with for your own safety. However, she became too comfortable around him. When Chon found out what happened, he was very angry. She promised to pay him back the $4,000 by earning it through her job. However, Chon wasn't satisfied with that and demanded $10,000 instead as interest. Fan explained that it would take her a long time to pay off that extra amount. Chon was not just upset about losing the money. He was also furious because Fan had the nerve to steal from him in the first place. In March 1999, he had 2 of his associates kidnap Fan and bring her to his apartment on Granville Road. The apartment was huge, with 5 bedrooms, and it was filled with Hello Kitty decorations. There were Hello Kitty curtains, bed sheets, wall art, and even plush toys scattered everywhere. Chan's plan was to exploit Fan by forcing her into prostitution and making her work constantly until she paid off her debt to him. However, no matter how much money she made, he was never satisfied. He kept raising the interest on her debt more and more, making it impossible for her to ever pay him back. She just couldn't keep up with the rapidly growing debt. To make matters worse, her workload increased, and the group started taking out their frustrations on her. They began to hit her repeatedly, and often she would end up so hurt and bruised that she couldn't even do her job. Even with all this, the group continued to get high and subjected her to even more beatings. They laughed at her suffering, but things were about to get much worse. If you're sensitive to stories like this, you might want to stop reading now because it won't be easy to hear. The group that tortured Fan included Chon Mon-lok, who was the leader, and Leon Weilung, one of his gang members. Leon was reported to be either 19 or 21 years old. Another member of the group was Leung Ching Cho, who was 26 years old and also worked under Chun. Soon after, a new member joined them, a 14-year-old girl named Afong. Although Afong had been said to be one of the girlfriends of one of Chun's gang members, she became a victim herself as Chun manipulated her over time. Despite her young age and the fact that she was being controlled, Afong showed a cold demeanor and seemed to enjoy participating in the group's mistreatment of Fan. She laughed hysterically while all of this was being done to Fan. She even got creative and would come up with her own ways to hurt and torture Fan. They were not satisfied with the amount of money Fan was bringing in. They kept mistreating her more and more. They tied her up, punched her, kicked her repeatedly, and even stomped on her. Remember, this was someone's daughter, someone's mother, and someone's wife. Looking at the women in your life, can you ever begin to imagine this happening to one of them? This case sickens me to my very core. The abuse continued, though. They would force themselves on her over and over again. They even forced her to eat her own feces. They beat her with bats and metal bars, stabbed her with kitchen knives, and jabbed forks into her. They smashed pieces of furniture over her, and even tied her up in a standing position to use her as a punching bag. Somehow, during all this abuse, Fan became pregnant, and they just beat the fetus out of her. It makes you wonder what went wrong with these people to become so flawed in the head that they could ever think this was okay. If there is a seventh rung of hell, I hope they are in it. I also hope the nearest snow cone stand to them is forever sold out. These creatures even cut open wounds on poor Fan, so they could rub hot cooking spices into her wounds and would laugh and make fun of her moans of pain. This was also about the time they decided that Fan should show signs of joy and happiness about her treatment. Yeah, you heard that right. If she refused to laugh and smile and tell them how happy it made her that they were torturing her, they would come up with new ways to make it worse. They even took things like hot candle wax and burned plastic and poured it on her bare feet and then beat her feet with metal rods. All the while this was all going on, Fan's husband and kids had no idea where she was or what she was doing. Did something happen to her, or did she simply leave them? They had no idea, at least for a while. If you thought that it couldn't get any worse for Fan, you'd be wrong. They soon started coming up with new ways to terrorize and hurt her. They took hot chili and oyster sauces and poured them into her eyes, blinding her and causing agonizing pain. But if that wasn't bad enough, they even made her drink the combination, and when she defecated and urinated, you can guess what they did with all that. We won't repeat it here again. You get the idea. They also used her as a human toilet, and if she gagged or tried to spit any of it out, they would start in on her again. After all this, they started wrapping her up in electrical wires and hanging her from a hook from the ceiling where they would beat her with rods and poke at her with whatever was nearby. Sometimes they would leave her hang there for days without giving her anything to eat or drink. Obviously, by now they could no longer use her for self-gratification, and they could no longer prostitute her for money. So they eventually would take her down and lay her in the bathroom floor and ignore her cries of pain while they watched TV or played video games. One night they decided to all go out on the town and left her laying there tied up on April 15th of 1999. Fan finally died as a result of all the abuse she had endured, finally freeing her of her torment. You'd think that would be the end of this shocking story, but not quite. When they came back, one of them had to go to the bathroom, and that's when they found Fan deceased in the floor. This is where it gets even more crazy. Instead of simply trying to think of a place to dispose of the body, nope, not these clowns. They simply got out a hacksaw and knives and started trying to dismember the poor woman. That's not the strange part. The strange part is this. They decapitated Fan's head and took it to the kitchen and placed it in a boiling pan of water to get the skin and meat off the bone. At the same time as all this is going on, there's human guts laying around. There's a woman's decapitated head on the stove, and while all of this is going on, these wingnuts decide, you know what? I think I want some noodles, and they start cooking noodles on the burner right next to Fan's head, stirring both the noodles and the head with the same spoon. Ugh, I can't even. I think I just puked a little bit. After boiling all the meat and eyes out of her skull, they took it and placed it inside a Hello Kitty doll. Why, you may ask? Who knows? That's how the case got its name, though. So there they are, having their noodles after all that, and they managed to keep the skull, one of her teeth, as well as a few other various pieces of Fan. They boiled the rest of her to try to keep as much of the smell out of the building as possible and ended up throwing her away with the trash. Then, they simply went on about their lives as if nothing had happened, for about a month that is. In May, Lao Mingfang rushed to the nearest police station to turn herself in and to tell them what happened to Fan. Why, you may ask? Apparently, Fan had returned from beyond the grave to wreak havoc on Lao. Lao began to tell the police about how the ghost of a woman she had helped murder was coming back from the grave to haunt her. At first, they were all slightly amused and didn't take her seriously, but when she said that she could take them to where it happened and show them her remains, they ended up finally taking her seriously. Once they followed her back to the apartment and saw the horror of what had happened, by then, there was no laughing. They were all arrested, but at trial, Lao was given immunity in exchange for her testimony. She explained that what she wanted, even more than immunity, was for Fan's ghost to leave her alone and to stop haunting her. Whether or not that Fan actually came back from the dead or not is unclear. She could have, who knows. Then again, it could have been her conscience finally catching up to her, demanding she do the right thing. Either way, the men involved ended up going to jail, but the trial was a joke and not a funny one. They kept going back and forth on whether or not the homicide was intentional or accidental. After what Fan had gone through, who the hell cares whether they meant her to die or not? In my own opinion, they should have given them the same treatment that she endured and with the same outcome, but Hong Kong didn't do that. They gave them life, but with the possibility of parole. So far, only the youngest has actually gotten out though. But do you think he stayed out of trouble? Of course not. Liang Xingqiu got his life sentence shortened to 18 years, and in 2014, he was released, where he stayed out for another 8 years. That is before he did something horrible to a 10-year-old child. If this pisses you off as bad as it does me, let's hear about it in the comments section. Fan's skull was given back to their family and eventually cremated. The apartment building where it all took place was demolished in September 2012 and has been rebuilt as a hotel named Soravit in 2016. Here's an eerie piece of info if you ever planned on staying there. The room where it all happened and where her head was cooked next to Noodles is not the restaurant there. Noodles, anyone? The case inspired the release of 2 films that told the story. Both Human Pork Chop and There Is a Secret in My Soup were released in 2001. I haven't seen them, and quite frankly, I don't plan on seeing them. This story was more than enough for me. Fan, wherever you are, God bless you. May you forever rest in peace. You did not deserve this. If you found the story interesting and want to hear other stories like it, well, not all of them are this bad, but for other creepy, spooky, or just all-out weird content, please check out our site at graveyarddance.com. You can follow us on social media there as well by scrolling down to the bottom of the page and hitting our social media icons. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to watch our content. If you have a suggestion for a possible story, drop them in the comments below. As always, thanks for watching.